Geography, we are told, is destiny. If you look at a map of West Africa, the destiny of the Sahel seems written in the unforgiving ink of isolation. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are landlocked. They have no coast. They have no direct access to the great blue highways of global trade. For centuries, military strategists and economists have agreed on one brutal truth. If you want to kill a landlocked nation, you do not need to bomb it. You simply need to close the road. In late 2023 and throughout 2024, this theory was put to the ultimate test when the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, imposed what were arguably the harshest sanctions in modern African history. The intent was not subtle. It was a siege. The traditional gateways, the bustling port of Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, and the vital harbor of Cotonou in Benin were slammed shut. Overnight, the lifeline was severed. Thousands of shipping containers filled with medicine, baby formula, spare parts, and construction materials were stranded on the docks of the Atlantic. The trucks stopped moving. The borders were sealed with concrete barriers and armed guards. The calculation in the capitals of the West and the coastal powers was precise. They believed that by cutting off the oxygen of trade, the economies of the Alliance of Sahel states would suffocate within weeks. They expected inflation to trigger riots. They waited for the people, hungry and isolated, to turn against their new military leaders. They waited, and they waited, but the collapse never came. If you believe a nation's destiny is defined by its will, not just its borders, tap the like button, and let's trace the new lifeline. Instead of suffocation, we witnessed a masterclass in survival. The planners of the blockade made a critical error. They forgot that a map is not a prison. It is a puzzle. And if one door is locked by an enemy, you do not stand there and bang on it until you starve. You find another door. Or if necessary, you build one. This is the untold story of the greatest logistical pivot in the history of the region. It is the story of how Burkina Faso, the heart of the Sahel, turned its back on the hostile ports of the West and looked southeast towards a narrow strip of land that refused to join the siege. That strip of land is Togo. What happened next was not just a shift in trade routes, it was a rewriting of political alliances through the language of asphalt and diesel. While the cranes in Cotonou stood idle, gathering rust in the salt air, the port of Lomé in Togo began to work overtime. The blockade, intended to break the spirit of the Sahel, instead hardened it. It forced the AES nations to realize that their reliance on the old France-Afrique corridors was a strategic vulnerability. As long as their survival depended on ports controlled by leaders hostile to their sovereignty, they would never be free. So, they initiated an emergency bypass surgery on the region's economy. The trucks that once drove south to Benin turned their wheels. They forged a new path. To understand the scale of this achievement, you must visualize the terrain. We are not talking about moving a few boxes. We're talking about feeding 70 million people. We're talking about importing the fuel that powers the power plants and exporting the cotton that pays the soldiers. The landlocked curse was broken not by changing the geography, but by changing the mindset. The AES proved that being landlocked does not mean being locked out. It simply means you must choose your friends very carefully. But this decision had consequences. It created winners and losers on a massive scale. While the Sahel found its breath again, the coastal nations that obeyed the order to close their borders began to realize they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had weaponized their geography, thinking it gave them leverage, only to discover that leverage works both ways. To see the full picture, we must travel to the coast. We must contrast the silence of one port with the roar of another. We must look at how a single political decision in Lomé saved the Sahel, and how a decision in Cotonou may have permanently crippled an economy. The port of Cotonou in Benin was once known as the lung of Niger. For decades, it breathed life into the Sahelian economy. It was the natural entry point, geographically close and historically integrated. The revenue generated from transit fees accounted for a massive portion of Benin's national budget. The truck drivers, the dock workers, the customs agents, An entire ecosystem depended on the flow of goods northward. Then came the order to stop. When the political leadership in Benin decided to fully enforce the blockade, they believed they were applying pressure to a neighbor. In reality, they were applying a tourniquet to their own limb. Reports from mid-2024 painted a haunting picture. The vast parking lots in Cotonou, usually teeming with trucks bound for Niamey, stood empty. The cranes were still. The warehouses, built to hold the strategic reserves of the Sahel, echoed with silence. It was a case of economic suicide committed in the name of political compliance. By trying to starve their neighbor, they starved their own logistics sector. The situation was similar in Abidjan. Côte d'Ivoire, the economic powerhouse of French-speaking West Africa, also closed its gates to Mali and Burkina Faso. They gambled that the AES nations would break before the port revenues dried up. They lost that gamble. While Cotonou and Abidjan turned away their best customers, a few hundred kilometers along the coast, the port of Lomé in Togo made a very different calculation. Under the pragmatic diplomacy of its leadership, Togo adopted a stance of active neutrality. They did not endorse the military coup, but they refused to endorse the starvation of civilians. The message from Lomé was simple: we are open for business. The result was a seismic shift in the flow of capital. Almost overnight, the logistics map of West Africa tilted. The fleets of trucks that were barred from Benin diverted to Togo. The shipping giants, Maersk and MSC, rerouted their vessels. The statistics are staggering. By early 2026, traffic along the Lomé-Ouagadougou corridor had surged by nearly 300%. The port of Lomé, the only deep-water port in the region capable of handling the latest generation of megaships, became the new heartbeat of the Sahel. This was not just luck, it was strategy. Togo understood that in a multipolar world, you do not isolate your neighbors, you integrate with them. By refusing to join the siege, Togo positioned itself as the indispensable bridge between the ocean and the hinterland. The contrast is devastating. Today, business owners in Benin are petitioning their government, asking why they were forced to hand their market share over to a rival. They watch as the wealth that used to flow through their hands now flows through Lomé. It is a lesson that will be taught in business schools for generations. Never weaponize a service that can be replaced. If this comparison helps you see who really lost the trade war, a simple thank you in the comments is plenty. Also remember to like, share, and subscribe to Africa Global Opportunities TV for more. And we move inland. However, shifting the cargo from one port to another was only the first variable in the equation. The real challenge lay in the infrastructure. The port of Lomé is efficient, but the distance to Ouagadougou is nearly 1,000 kilometers. In the world of logistics, distance is cost, and cost is the enemy of the consumer. Every extra hour a truck spends on the road, the price of rice in the market goes up. Every day a container sits in customs, the price of medicine rises. The old bureaucratic model was a nightmare. Traditionally, goods arriving in a coastal port had to undergo rigorous customs inspections before they could leave the terminal. They were taxed, checked, and often delayed by corrupt officials seeking bribes. Then, upon crossing the border into Burkina Faso, they were stopped again, checked again, taxed again. This double handling was slow, expensive, and in a time of crisis, unacceptable. The AES needed speed. They needed a way to make the physical border irrelevant. So the planners in Ouagadougou and Lomé sat down and devised a radical solution. They asked a question that defied the norms of international trade. What if we pretend that Burkina Faso has a coastline? What if the customs clearance didn't happen at the sea? What if the container could be lifted off the ship in Togo, placed directly onto a truck, sealed with a digital lock, and legally treated as if it had never entered Togo at all? This concept is known as the dry port, and its implementation along the Lomé-Ouaga corridor has become the silent revolution that kept the Sahel alive. The concept of a dry port is a logistical sleight of hand. It essentially allows a country to move its border hundreds of kilometers inland. Under the new agreement signed between Togo and the Alliance of Sahel States, the terminals in Bobo-Dioulasso and Ouagadougou have been designated as extensions of the port of Lomé. This legal fiction changes everything. Here is how it works in practice. When a container filled with essential medical supplies arrives in Togo, it is not stripped and searched by Togolese customs. It is not delayed by paperwork meant for local imports. Instead, it is fitted with an electronic tracking seal. It is treated as in transit. It is loaded directly onto a truck or a train wagon and sent north. Legally, that container has not yet entered a country. It is in a state of suspension. It only effectively arrives when it reaches the secure terminal in Burkina Faso. Only then, deep within the sovereign territory of the Sahel, is the seal broken. Only then are the duties paid. This removes the greatest friction point in African trade, the border crossing. For decades, crossing a border in West Africa was a process defined by extortion. A truck could sit for days in the heat, while officials invented reasons to levy fines. The dry port system eliminates this leverage. The truck does not stop because legally it has not arrived yet. The impact on speed has been revolutionary. In the old days, under the inefficient systems of the Frank Zone, it could take up to 15 days for a container to clear the port and reach the capital. Today, under the pressure of necessity, that time has been compressed to as little as 3 days. This speed is not just about convenience, it is about survival. When you are under a blockade, inventory is low. You cannot afford to have weeks of food or fuel tied up in a warehouse in a foreign country. You need a just-in-time delivery system. This transformation is the backbone of the new Sahel logistics strategy. It is a shift from a passive reliance on coastal goodwill to an active management of the supply chain. By controlling the customs process domestically, Burkina Faso reclaims the revenue that was previously lost to corruption at the coast. The taxes are paid in Ouagadougou in the local currency, contributing to the national treasury rather than lining the pockets of foreign intermediaries. If you want us to keep mapping these strategic shifts, consider joining as a member. We follow the supply chain line by line. The success of the Bobo Dioulasso dry port has emboldened the region. We are now seeing plans to expand this network. The vision is to turn Burkina Faso into a regional hub, a distribution center. Goods arriving from Togo can be processed in the center of the Sahel and then dispatched to Mali or Niger. It turns the geography upside down. Instead of being the end of the line, the landlocked nation becomes the turntable. However, drawing lines on a map and signing customs agreements is the sterile part of logistics. It is the work of lawyers and bureaucrats in air-conditioned offices, but the reality of moving thousands of tons of cargo across the savannah is visceral, loud, and dangerous. The dry port solves the bureaucratic hurdles, but it cannot solve the physical threat. The corridor from the Togolese border to the capital is not a peaceful highway. It cuts through territories that have been plagued by insecurity for a decade. The very groups that destabilized the Sahel, the armed insurgents who thrive on chaos, know that this road is the artery of the nation. They know that if they can cut this road, they can starve the capital. The trucks carrying fuel and grain are not just commercial vehicles, they are high-value targets. An ambush on a convoy does more damage than a direct attack on a military base. It spreads fear. It raises insurance premiums. It discourages drivers from getting behind the wheel. So, the efficiency of the electronic seal must be matched by the brutality of steel. The commercial logistics had to be militarized. What emerged on the tarmac was a new formation. The lone truck driver, navigating the potholed roads with a prayer, is a figure of the past. Today the horizon is dominated by something much larger, much louder, and significantly more intimidating. They call it the Iron Snake. To witness it from the air is to see a marvel of modern organization imposed upon an ancient landscape. It is a single column of vehicles, sometimes stretching for 10 kilometers, moving rhythmically through the dust. 500, sometimes 600 trucks, moving as one organism. This is the convoy system. It is the military answer to a commercial problem. In the past, a truck driver would load his cargo in Lomé and drive north alone, stopping when he was tired, eating where he pleased. That world is gone. Today, the logistics of the Sahel operate under a doctrine of total discipline. The journey begins at the border. Here, the commercial trucks are marshaled into formation. They are not arranged randomly. The fuel tankers, the most volatile and valuable assets, are placed in the center, protected by the heavy bulk of grain trucks and container carriers. Flanking this river of steel are the Guardians, the rapid intervention battalions of the Burkina Faso army, often working in coordination with Togolese security forces on the southern side, provide a moving shield. Armored personnel carriers ride at the front and the rear. But the most important eyes are not on the road, they are in the sky. The use of surveillance drones has fundamentally altered the security equation. Before the convoy reaches a blind corner or a dense patch of scrubland, the Sky Eye has already scanned the heat signatures. If an anomaly is detected, a group of motorcycles lying in wait, or a disturbed patch of earth suggesting an improvised explosive device, the column halts. The threat is neutralized by air or by advanced teams before the civilian drivers ever see it. This is the price of bread in 2026. Every bag of rice that arrives in the market in Ouagadougou has been escorted by a soldier. Every liter of petrol has been watched over by a drone. We must pause to acknowledge the human element of this machine. We often speak of soldiers as heroes, and they are. But what of the drivers? These are civilians. They are fathers and husbands. They are driving vehicles filled with flammable liquid through zones where they know they are targets. They do not wear body armor. They grip the steering wheel, eyes scanning the horizon, trusting in the shield provided by the state. Their courage is the fuel of the resistance. Without them, the army could secure the road, but the city would still starve. This coordinated effort is the practical application of breaking the blockade. It is one thing for a politician to declare on television that the country will not bow down. It is another thing entirely to organize 600 heavy vehicles to cross a hostile zone, on time, week after week. It proves to the world, and more importantly to the population, that the state is functional. It proves that the government can project power and provide security, even when the odds are stacked against it. Where are you watching from? City and country. May your path always be open, and we promise to stay strictly on the facts. The psychological impact of the Iron Snake is profound. When the convoy rolls into a provincial town, it is an event. The ground shakes, the children run to the roadside. It is a tangible demonstration of connection. It tells the isolated communities, you are not forgotten, the road is open. However, we must be realistic about the cost. Logistics by convoy is effective, but it is brutally expensive. It is slow. A convoy moves at the speed of its slowest truck. If one vehicle breaks an axle, 500 vehicles must stop or slow down. The fuel consumption of the escort vehicles, the maintenance of the armored cars, the flight hours of the drones. This adds a premium to every product on the shelf. Furthermore, the road itself is suffering. The asphalt highway connecting Togo to Burkina Faso was not designed for this intensity of load. The constant pounding of heavy axles, combined with the heat, is pulverizing the surface. Potholes are becoming craters. The lifeline is wearing thin. The planners in the Alliance of Sahel states know this. They know that the convoy system is a wartime necessity, not a peacetime solution. You cannot build a thriving industrial economy if every shipment requires a military escort. You cannot compete globally if your logistics costs are double that of your neighbors. Asphalt is soft. It breaks. It requires constant repair. To truly secure the future, to make the connection to the sea permanent and unbreakable, the Sahel needs something harder than asphalt. It needs steel. The railway project connecting Lomé to Ouagadougou is not a new idea. It has existed on paper for a century, a ghost of the colonial ambition to extract resources. But today, the blueprint has been dusted off with a new purpose. It is no longer about extraction, it is about connection. The logic is undeniable. A single freight train can carry the load of 50 trucks. It does not get flat tires. It does not get stuck in mud. And most importantly, it is far more difficult to hold hostage. A rail link is a permanent umbilical cord that fuses the economy of the coast with the economy of the hinterland. Discussions are already underway to modernize the existing tracks and close the missing gaps. It is a monumental engineering challenge, requiring billions in investment, but the cost of not building it has already been paid in the lost billions of the blockade. The leadership of the alliance knows that the future of Sahel logistics cannot rely on rubber tires grinding against crumbling asphalt. It must be built on a spine of steel. When that first train eventually blows its whistle in the station of Ouagadougou, carrying goods from the sea without a single checkpoint, the siege will be officially over. It will mark the ultimate act of breaking the blockade, not just for today, but for history. This journey from the suffocating panic of the closed borders to the disciplined roar of the Iron Snake teaches us a profound lesson. Geography is not destiny. Geography is just the board on which the game is played. The outcome is determined by the players. The coastal powers thought they held the keys to the prison. They thought that by locking the gates at Cotonou and Abidjan, the Sahel would wither. But they forgot that life always seeks the light. When one door closes, resilience kicks it down. If resilience inspires you, subscribe and share this with one brave soul. We build bridges, not wall. The corridor to Togo is more than just a trade route. It is a symbol of a new West African reality. It proves that blind obedience to external orders is bad business. Benin and Côte d'Ivoire obeyed the sanctions, and they lost their biggest market. Togo chose neutrality and partnership, and they gained a future. We are witnessing the birth of a new economic axis. It is an axis that runs north-south, ignoring the artificial divisions of the past. It is redefining Sahel logistics for the next century. The trucks are still rolling tonight. As you watch this, somewhere on the dark road between Dapong and Kupila, a convoy is moving. The headlights cut through the dust. The drone watches from above, and the driver grips the wheel, knowing that he is carrying more than just fuel or flour. He is carrying the breath of a nation. The map was meant to be a cage, but through sweat, strategy, and steel, the people of the Sahel have turned it into a ladder.
Africa Global Opportunities TV. Subscribe for more updates.